So thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to talk to this audience, and it was really fun to listen to or learn all these different things. I have a mix between, I guess, what you also said in the beginning, a sort of more technical talk, and I'm trying to make a point that's at the higher level. But I'm used to giving technical talks, so I'm going to still support it with slides that have some technical content, and we'll see how much of the technical content we end up having time for. So for one, I should start by, if you open your program, that's not exactly the title. A few of you asked me about that title, which made me realize that I really didn't phrase it right. What I meant to say is maybe better expressed by this title, that when you think about how to design mechanisms, and I'll come back to economic examples in a minute, we should have in mind that the people who were playing or participating in our mechanisms, whether it's a biological or a maybe less designed or a humanly designed mechanisms, people have to learn how to behave in these mechanisms, and we should take this into account in thinking about it as we design things. Or maybe just forget mechanisms, you should think about games and understanding what outcomes to expect out of a game with the player evolution in mind. So as I said in the title, I'm more thinking about mechanisms, and I guess the principal mechanisms are all these things on the other side of the slide of how eBay sells stuff, how Google sells advertisement, how all these online things like, I don't know, Top Coder, Mechanical Turk, selling effort. So these are all places where you can post some work and someone will take care of it. And there are many, many more of them. I could have filled the slides with logos of all kinds of things, where you can either sell physical things or advertisement, which is sort of impression, or you can sell effort. Then people will go and take care of your job for money, and there's mechanisms behind of how this gets taken care of. Most of those are very simple, very easy to understand sort of mechanisms. So either this classical sort of auction style, which I have up there, it's called first and second price auction. So depending whether you pay the bid you put in, or the person who put in the best bid always wins, and either you paid to put in the bid or the second bid. Advertisement is sold on something more complicated, which I don't want to explain. Effort is either sold on sort of auctions of this sort, or quite often by what I would say is an all-pay auction. Everyone participates, everyone tries it, and the guy with the best design wins some sort of reward. Like I give $100 for someone who designs something for me, and the entries are designs. That's usually referred to as an all-pay auction. We all exert effort to participate in the auction. The best design wins, but everyone had to pay. That's all-pay. War of attrition is a variation on this, where you see other people's efforts, and as you're the only one left, you can drop out even you didn't have to put in your full effort. One important point that's maybe a side issue, though actually was driving the research that this talk is mostly based on, is that most of these, and actually every one of the things I put in, is not the classical auction that you design for a single shot. Like, I guess one important auction example that gets mentioned a lot in econ literature is like spectrum auctions. And the way you think about spectrum auctions is that the government wants to sell the spectrum, or you make the spectrum used. This is an event that happens very rarely, every high number of years. In contrast, these kind of things, selling ads, selling stuff, needing some coding help, is something you need all the time. This is something that there's a lot of different opportunities to buy this kind of thing, either any of these things, and it happens very, very regularly. And these are the kind of things I'm thinking of. And in these kind of scenarios, you should think about one person here in the middle who have all these opportunities, and in addition to acquiring the thing he wants to acquire, he's going to learn which one of the forums are best suited his efforts. So he's not only learning how to behave in eBay's auction or in whether to quote something in a top coder competition, but in addition also learning which of those things will satisfy his needs better. So there's a second learning effect here at a higher level, and I'll come back to this in a little bit later in the talk. So this is the kind of learning I'm going to have in mind. If you take the sort of classical economic Econ 101 style analysis, then usually you think about these games like first prize or second prize, and a classical answer of what to expect is Nash equilibrium. Classically, you're hoping that this thing has a unique Nash equilibrium, and therefore you can predict the Nash equilibrium. And that's what you claim is the answer is. And I'm going to try to claim that that shouldn't be the answer for multiple reasons that I'll come to throughout the talk. The fact that Nash equilibrium is a problematic answer, that has been well known for like 20 years, maybe longer. So that's not really new. But I'm trying to convince you that I have an interesting alternative of what we should look at instead. So what's wrong with Nash equilibrium, just to make sure we are all on the same page, there's no reason to believe that there's natural behavior that leads to Nash. As I just mentioned, some games don't have a unique Nash, and then you have a little problem of which of the Nashes should you predict, and we heard about some of this earlier yesterday. Since I'm a computer scientist, I can't stop myself from mentioning that there's a computational difficulty in some game. Finding a Nash equilibrium in some games is computationally hard. For those of you who do use Nash equilibrium a lot, I should preface this. This is an area in development. I'm quite aware of a valid criticism that these computationally hard games are unbelievably unnatural. And so right now, the jury is out whether more research needs to get done to show that computational difficulty is a much more pervasive problem, even natural games have it, or instead the other way, the positive answer, that this hardness is a quirk of some sort of craziness, the way they design those games, and naturally evolving games don't happen this property. I don't know the answer, but certainly there is a difficulty here. I don't know if we know what the natural evolution of behavior is, but for this talk, my answer is going to be the kind of dynamics, or what I'm going to declare as my natural behavior is the kind of dynamics that was discussed yesterday in the afternoon. There were a bunch of them discussed, and maybe one of the big messages, I don't want to choose. What I want to, what the theory that we're developing, or a theory I'm thinking about and I want to tell you about, wants to say that if anything of that form of dynamic is how people evolve or learn to play games, then I can tell you interesting things about the outcome. I don't have to tell me which one. So this is a very orthogonal to one of, say, the afternoon talks yesterday that's one to say that a particular dynamic is nice because it actually does find the Nash. I don't want to choose a dynamic because I can't control people of what they do. I want to convince you that this class of dynamics that I have in mind here is natural enough that it's a reasonable guess of what people might be doing. But that only remains true if I don't choose. Namely, there are many of them, and they're all reasonable. I can't choose which one they should be doing. So what do I mean by dynamic, this kind of dynamic? I need any dynamic that satisfies the following property that we have seen yesterday also, which usually, or I call no regret, or usually called no regret. And here is the property, which I want to actually go through again. For those of you who well remember it from yesterday, I'm sorry, but this is sort of the centerpiece of what I'm talking about. So I want to make sure everyone is with it, and I'm going to sort of go through, make sure you understand what the property is. So the property is, this is a repeated game, like buying advertisement, selling your effort. If you want to make money on this, those are repeated games. You're over and over doing something. And what I want to ask you is do at least as well as a single strategy with hindsight. Now, I will do this both in example and in English. This is a low bar. It's a low bar. You could do a lot better than this. If you're a pizza company and you want to advertise, I highly recommend you put in very competitive bits in the evening and not so competitive bits in the morning. Well aware of the news, no one eats pizza in the morning. So you're alone, you can put in low bits. In the evening, it's much better to put in good high bits because it's very competitive. Everyone wants to sell pizza. There are other similar efforts. You could be that, as it turns out, in the evening, in task doing, there are a lot of people at home who want to make extra money. You need to be competitive. In the morning, these guys are mostly at work. I'm unemployed. It's not so competitive. So there's a lot of things in life where we should vary our behavior based on time of day or whatever. And I'm asking not to compete with that. Just do a single thing, single thing with hindsight. You keep doing the same thing over and over again. But I'm asking you, if always going to top coder and always trying out the coding thing is good for you, please wake up to this fact sooner or later. If it's only good for you on Mondays, that's trickier. I'm not asking you to wake up to that. But if it's good for you to do it 24/7, sooner or later, please notice this fact. This is the standard I'm asking you to do. So just to make sure you get it in a concrete example, here's an example we have seen last day. It's, in this case, it's a coordination game. My example says that these two people, X and Y, want to use a terminal, and for some reason, they're using a stupid game to do this, in which case they either show up at the same terminal and fight with each other and get reward 0, the two terminals, top and bottom, or they show up at different terminals, in which case they can take care of their work. A very simplistic, silly example. If you look at this game as a coordination game, what they should do is one of them should choose top and the other one the bottom. That's the two good Nash equilibria. There is also a crazy mixed Nash equilibrium, which has lower payoff, where they're randomly choosing and fighting over it. And if you want to think of it as a repeated game, then I'm thinking they're not allowed to talk to each other here because it's a silly example. They repeatedly, choose something, some payoff happens, choose something, some payoff happens, choose something. In the beginning, they don't know. Now, what is it that they need to learn here? They're not learning the environment. I told you what the environment is, the two terminals and the two people. What they're learning is the behavior of the other guy. And what's interesting that they're doing this simultaneously. X is learning how Y behaves, Y is learning how X behaves. But after they did it for a while, they should get a better idea and they should coordinate. So for example, so again, the regret standard is that I want them to not regret not doing the same thing, not regret not doing the same thing over and over again. It could be that the best thing is to alternate top, bottom. They don't have to notice this. But if top is really good for them, please wake up to this fact. If top is always better, wake up to this fact. If I go back to and actually, one correction here, sorry. Like we well learned yesterday, I can't expect this to be really true. It's true in the limit. Initially, there's some mistakes there. So there's a small error. The error goes to 0 as time goes to infinity. You're learning to do this. So the good news about this standard, when I said it's a low bar, I meant two things. First of all, you could do better than this. There are algorithms that strictly beat this bar. But more dominantly, many simple algorithms guarantee this. In the algorithms community, I guess there are two that I usually name as my two favorites. I usually claim, and I think that's sort of valid, that if you're an economist, your favorite algorithm is Hartman-Muscolas regret matching. And if you're a computer scientist, your favorite algorithm is multiplicative weight update. Those are the algorithms that are common in the community. You can think of multiplicative weight update as a discrete version of the replicator dynamic, a different discrete version than what we heard about yesterday, but it is also a discrete version of the replicator dynamic. And there are many others that either got mentioned yesterday or maybe not. If you take the dynamic just to get a sense, I put in one slide with one of these dynamics. So this is meant to be as a 2D description of how people are playing with. Those dots are the Nash equilibria. So this dot here represents when X chooses the top and Y chooses the bottom, and this when it happens the other way around. And this red dot is the crazy mixed Nash equilibrium. That's a bad idea. And if you start them off with something as I said, it's like the replicator dynamic except discrete, it converges to the right thing. They somehow decide. As I start favoring the top a little bit, my opponent learns that I seem to be favoring the top, so he starts favoring the bottom, and we converge to one of those two solutions. Okay, so this is the kind of learning I had in mind. Just to make sure you get one important message of how this learning can be more powerful or can lead to better answers than classical Nash equilibrium analysis. I also repeated the rock, paper, scissors example from yesterday, except I did a slightly different contortion than the one we saw yesterday. So this is the classical rock, paper, scissors. So what did I have? Rock beats scissor and paper beats scissor, paper and zero-sum game. And if they say the same thing, they choose 0. If you do the dynamic for this, it cycles around. It's not converging, but it's not doing anything bad either. But I'm also interested in one when the dynamic is actually problematic. And here is how I contorted it to make the dynamic problematic. I put in negative 9s in the diagonal. Let me think about this game a bit. So the same thing, rock beats scissor, scissor beats paper, and so on, like the cycler property like we always had, except if you collide, you get the negative 9 penalty. Okay, so what's the dynamic on this? We get the dynamic that cycles around, goes towards the outside. Actually, I should add, what's the Nash equilibrium on this game? 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, thank you. It's exactly the same thing. You can't avoid the penalty. Because if you favor something, I'm going to favor the thing that beats that. So you kind of have to keep me in the dark of what you're playing, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, which is probability a third we're cashing in on the 9 penalty. And the 9 on my slide has to do with the size of the slide. If I make it bigger, then it won't be visible, so I can make it a much worse number than this. But what this dynamic does, and what was my main point, that it's going to circle around in the way I put in these red arrows here. The dynamic avoids the diagonal. What it does is that I'm doing scissor a bit too heavily. You as an opponent learn that she's doing scissor all the time. I better do rock, or whatever, sorry. Yeah, rock. Rock beats scissor, and then I learn, oh, she's doing rock all the time, let's beat her. And we're cycling around, effectively avoiding the diagonal. So what we're getting to is a solution that actually has higher welfare than a Nash equilibrium. The learners doing better than a Nash equilibrium would have done because they're avoiding the diagonal. Okay, so what's known about this sort of behavior, this no-regret dynamic? So I guess for a couple of slides, or in fact maybe from here until the end, I'm going to slightly cheat. And remember, when people are learning, there's a teeny bit of error in their learning. There is vanishing regret what they reach and not no regret. But to simplify the slides, I got rid of the vanishing regret. So assume everyone plays no regret. And then it's well known that what happens when all players play no regret is that play converges to something that's called correlated, or more precisely called coarse correlated equilibrium. So what do I mean converges to? I can take your behavior, the way you're playing over time, as an empirical probability distribution. Like you play this 17 times and this other thing 18 times. And I can think of this as an empirical probability distribution. And I can look at the limit of that distribution. And I claim that that distribution is sort of like an equilibrium. It has an equilibrium-like property. The property it has is exactly the property that no regret said. Given that distribution, the utility of every player is at least as good as any fixed strategy with hindsight. So why do I call this correlated equilibrium? So maybe first, why I call it an equilibrium. If they were doing this independently, if they could reach this property in the middle here while playing independently, that would be Nash equilibrium. That's the classical Nash equilibrium. Everyone plays independently, and they don't regret something else. That's the definition of what equilibrium is. They're not feeling like they should play something else. The correlation is coming from the learning. They all correlate on the shared history. They all see something in common, and because of this, the play gets correlated. So it's like a Nash equilibrium, except for the correlation. For those of you who know classical correlated equilibrium, or maybe either you see the difference, or I should admit there is a slight difference here, which this version is more natural in the learning context. It's a bit more general. Okay, so what you get is coarse correlated equilibrium. And I guess if I want to go back to my example, just to make sure this is clear, in the cycling around that 6th cycle, the resulting coarse correlated equilibrium is that you play those six squares with probability 1/6 each. You're cycling around in them. That's the final distribution that they're converging to. This is not an Nash because they can't play it independently. It's not a product distribution. But this is what they're going to converge to. And again, my point was this is much higher social welfare. On average, every player gets 0 here, whereas in Nash, they would get a -3. That is in probability a third. They're paying a -9 penalty. OK, so that's what I'm trying to argue, that this is the kind of nice equilibrium concept that we should look at. And before I give you an example of what one can prove about this, let me summarize something that maybe I would have been reasonable to actually have a slide for, but at least I should say. So again, the point here is that I want to think of, make the assumption that the players are playing something in which they're getting this fixed strategy with no regret about fixed strategies with hindsight. I don't want to name which of these algorithms they use. I want to say anything of this vein is OK with me. And I want to argue, and hopefully you accept, or you can ask, we can have a debate about this at the end, that this is a reasonable assumption. There are many easy algorithms to take care of this, and it's a humanly reasonable, very Nash equilibrium-like property. OK. And then the question is, what can we say about this? And if you think about what happened in the previous talks, or actually maybe look at some of the literature, there's a fair amount of literature, for example, or large literature, large and interesting literature, in working at what replicator dynamic converges to. And it's interesting, and it's fun, but it's really kind of hard to work it out in many particular games. So the next message I want to convince you, I don't want to work it out. I don't know which dynamic they're using. They may or may not be using the replicator dynamic. So I can't actually hope to work out the outcome. And I don't want to work out the outcome. I want to claim that some games, and this is going to be in the auction framework, I can show properties of the outcome without working out what the outcome really is. And that, especially in the mechanism design context, that's a good thing. So if I can show you that this kind of mechanism, if everyone learns, whatever way they learn will result in high social welfare, that's a reassuring property to have, even if we're not fully predictive of what exactly will happen. And that's sort of the next message. So for that, I want to switch to actually the auction framework, so this sort of individual auctions. And again, you can think of it the same way we used to, that people are bidding and their outcomes, and they're figuring out, ideally what the other people are doing, possibly even what on earth the mechanism really was. Life is a little more complicated here because the regret standard is a little harder. There are many different things you could do, and you should not regret any one of them. I'm going to sweep this under the rug for now, but happy to try to answer questions. The goal is going to be that I want to claim that some of these mechanisms are guaranteed to have high social welfare, or reasonably high social welfare. And I want to do this in a robust kind of way. So the classical analysis would say, for example, a second price auction is guaranteed to generate optimal social welfare. It sells to the highest bidder, and you're supposed to behave truthfully. But I would like to have it robustly. I'm going to give up on how high is high. I don't insist on being absolutely optimal, so sort of what sometimes referred to as second best. I don't know if second best, but not quite so bad. But I want to do this robustly. So I want to claim that it's true even if there's a lot of uncertainty about what the other players are or what the game is, even if they are learning, and even if there's simultaneously multiple mechanisms around, they have to learn that too. And again, learning here will mean the no regret. Just to make sure we're also on the same page of what I mean by high social welfare, I would put a big distinction between social welfare that can be really eaten up by selfish behavior, where the classical example is the tragedy of the commons. So we have seen this also yesterday, the whole bunch of a common, I don't know if this is a common, but some sort of green. Everyone can put cows on this common, and I guess the rational or selfishly rational solution is to everyone putting at least one or maybe a couple cows on the grass to the point that the grass is eaten up and there is nothing left and all the cows are scrawny and die off. To model this, he said that a value for an individual cow is the decreasing function of the congestion, that how many cows you put there. And indeed, the unique Nash equilibrium here, and also what what at least these dynamics converge to is that people put too many cows, and the value of the cow and the value of the whole patch goes to 0. So this is what I view as bad. There was a good social welfare to be had, and selfish behavior drove that all the way down to 0, or very close to 0. And what I would like to have, and that's going to be the main result that I at least want to tell you about, and I know I'm sort of running out of time, so I won't give you so much about this, is that in this auction framework, all of those auctions, first price, second price, all of them, any of them, with very vanilla assumptions about environment. I don't have to assume anything about symmetry or anything about everyone running the same auction. Any way to combine them, they won't be optimal. They're not perfect, but they do not have tragedies of the common. You're preserving a large fraction of social welfare, no matter how you put them together. And that's the main message, and again, under this robust assumption. So for a general monism, I could have more complicated things in mind, but I think an individual item auction is the simple thing I want you to think about. But if you want, it could be mechanisms that decide whether a public project is built or whether how to share a resource. Every user, I assume, has a value for this. So an individual auction, you have a value for winning the thing that you're auctioning. And there's a price. So this that you're going to have to pay. And if you win the item, you have to pay the price. Or maybe you have to pay the price anyhow if it's an all-pay auction. And this is your value. So the one standard assumption I'm making here that there's what's called quasi-linear utility. That is, if you have to pay for something, you subtract the price from the value. I think the most illustrative thing I can tell you to help you understand what I mean, or what kind of auctions I mean, or what kind of guarantees I mean, to actually spend a couple of times on a couple of slides on a very simple auction that's intuitive and a little bit problematic, first price. So not second price. I know second price is nicer. But first price is a better illustration. So first price means these people put in bids, and then somehow these bids set the price, and the highest bidder wins it, and he pays his own price, whatever he put in. This is how we buy houses. You put in a bid, and if you win the house or get the house, you have to pay whatever you named. That's what I mean. First price auction seems pretty fragile, but in a Nash equilibrium analysis, it might be OK. If there is a pure Nash equilibrium, which unfortunately is a big if here, but if there is one, then this guy can sort of take over the item if he wants by slightly outbidding the winner. And because of this, there is this nice observation or theorem by Bikhchandani that even in much complicated settings, when people want all kinds of combinations of goods, if the first price auction has a pure Nash equilibrium, that's socially optimal. Now, why is that? Because first price auction in a pure Nash equilibrium prices, and those prices behave the way prices behave in the supermarket. They're market clearing prices and generate socially optimal outcome via the market. What I mean by market clearing or via the market clearing, because any person seeing a pure Nash equilibrium could again outbid these items and just get them for a little bit higher value. But this is super fragile. First of all, there's the line that I ran over in a second. Pure Nash equilibrium tends not to exist. But you can sort of see that if there's any uncertainty around, if you don't know how other people are behaving, either because they're learning or because you don't know who they are, or for whatever reason, this algorithm won't work at all. I have to know the price and try to outbid them. But if you don't know how other people behave, the price is random, so I can't outbid something at random. I don't know it. But there's something I can do. So what I would like to do, and this is going to be my standard here, I would like to recreate the way prices behave without knowing the price. So how do prices behave? Prices behave like the top line up there. It allows you to generate a value for yourself, which is your value at the current price. There's some price, and you can grab this item at this price. That's how why prices are good. Prices are really nice, and we know a lot of good things about prices. And I would like to be able to do this, well, or at least approximately this, but I want to not use the prices. So here is what I mean by not using the prices. I want you to be able to have what I will call a robust bid. one that's not the price, which you can put in and guarantee reasonable welfare for yourself. But reasonable, that's my standard, the value minus the price. So you wonder if robust bids exist. I mean, the price, yeah, price. I go in the supermarket, look at the price, that's what I'm bidding. So, but I claim it does, and what you're supposed to do is something that's natural, though maybe less natural than looking at the price, shade your value. And at the simplicity of this slide, I'm proposing shading your value by a factor of 2. So if you shade your value by a factor of 2, and again, 2 is not optimal here, shade your value by a bit, you're guaranteeing this inequality exactly except with a factor of 2 in it. You're guaranteeing that either you win, and lucky thing, you won at half the price, so half the value is left for you, or else you lose, but then someone else must have had a high value for the item, or the price was high. Okay, so there's this inequality that I shaded up there that you can guarantee with a bid, which is completely ignorant of everything else. You just take your own value, you can pre-compute it. Doesn't matter who's around, doesn't matter how rational those people are, you can do this. So this is a robust version of the first price auction, and I guess I'm going to claim that such robust things exist in much more complicated things. And I won't go through proving to you it exists because maybe that's too much technical detail, but I want to actually at least define it. So what I want, auctions are good, or mechanisms are turn out guaranteed to be really good. Oops, sorry. Guaranteed to be really good if it has this following magical property. There is some secret thing you could do, a secret thing that's good for you, not knowing what other people are doing. Even if they're crazy, even if they're learning, even if I pull them out of some weird place, I don't know what they do, there is a secret bid you can put in that behaves almost like market prices usually do. Now, the way prices behave is that you get your value at the price, and I'm instead asking you to get a fraction of the value. Some small fraction in the previous example was half the value at the price, or some fraction. And maybe not too surprisingly, and I definitely won't go through the proof, if you have such a secret bid, and you learn not to regret that particular secret bid, you don't have to do it, just don't regret it. Remember, it's important that I'm not asking you to bid half your value. That would be very prescriptive. Like maybe people don't want to do that. I'm just asking you that as you learn over and over the days, if half your value was a really good idea, I hope you're doing better. If you think about this from Google's perspective, imagine on the top left corner, they give you, our suggestion is you bid your half your value. Don't have to do it, but you're pretty crazy if you're doing worse than what's written on your screen. So that's the assumption, and maybe not too surprisingly, since I'm only getting you half your value, I'm not guaranteeing half the social welfare, not the full social welfare, with a similar proof that I definitely won't go through. So this is coming out of a recent paper with my student Vasily Sirkanis, and maybe more generally, we claim that this sort of analysis, this price-based or price-ignorant bid style analysis, actually is unbelievably robust, or very robust. So it's not only true at Nash equilibrium, which is sort of what I argued, but it's also true for learning outcomes, with the very same assumption, because what I ask the learners to do is not regret things. In particular, I'm not even asking you not to regret a complicated set of things. I'm asking you not to regret my secret bid, which I proposed you put on the screen to make sure they don't regret it. Same analysis. And in fact, it's also true, so I wasn't thinking about the uncertainty, but if there is some uncertainty around either about the participants or about the auction, then you can do that too. There are many, many auctions that have this property. So I showed you that you can do this with 1/2 on the first price auction. 1/2 wasn't an optimal answer here. You can do a little bit better, 1 minus 1 over E. But 1/2 you can do for almost every kind of auction in the universe and any kind of different mechanisms. And you can do it when you combine mechanisms. So combining mechanisms is maybe my last point, and I'm going to spend a few minutes on even works on combination. So what I mean, and a combination is what's written on the bottom of the slide. There are multiple things you can, think of house buying. That's going to be my dominant example Normally, you would bid on one house only. But in this smaller item, you could actually bid on multiple things and possibly add more money. So your value combines. Presumably, you only want one house. But if you offer to pay on multiple houses, you're going to have to pay. So payment is additive. And then you add multiple auctions. You play with them. Like, for example, if the value were also additive, then these are really separate auctions and have nothing to do with each other. But maybe a much more interesting example is when your value is the max. You only want one item. The rest of them you can put in the garbage. So it's kind of dangerous to bid on multiple things, but maybe you want to. Depends on the price. I'm going to have to assume something that I call that there are no complements across mechanisms. And I maybe want to point out that everyone's favorite second price auction, of course, in this kind of environment works quite badly. So again, this guy is buying houses here. If it's a second price auction, you can just put in your maximum value, and it seems clear. Well, not really, not for houses. If there are multiple houses in the market, you surely should decide which one you're putting in your bid on. And even if there is one at a time on the market, I don't want my house at this maximum price because hopefully tomorrow I can get a better deal. So this fact that the learning behavior helps you combine these auctions is something that the classical second price auction doesn't do, or at least not on its own. But I claim that if you're running simultaneously as many mechanisms as you want, and they all have this property with a parameter like lambda or like a half we have seen, then the composition also keeps this property. So for example, as many auctions as you want together work well, and I guess I won't explain what no complements are, but instead maybe want to spend a minute on the sort of hopefully take-home message. So what I'm trying to convince you is that some cases, and certainly auctions turn out to be a fertile domain for this, but there are many other games with this property. There are natural properties of the game, which are like this market clearing prices, where simple mechanisms have very robust welfare guarantees. And robust here I mean in the classical sense, like economic analysis usually suggests, but also in learning outcome sense. Even if people behave trying to learn how to behave, and even if you put multiple actions together, it preserves this sort of second best welfare properties. And I'm going to thank you for your interest.